The world around us is hostile to the Word of God and to biblical values, but we are called to be salt and light, to stand for truth in a decaying culture. We are not called to run from the fire, but be willing to step into the fire. God has placed you at this time in history on purpose and for a purpose. Join us as we get better equipped to address civics and culture from a biblical worldview. Welcome to Into the Fire, powered by Dream City Church.
Today's topic is preserving liberty, and I have here today Professor Steele Brand, who's an associate professor at ASU, who's here with me today. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, so it's really, I'm excited for this episode. I mean, I love this stuff anyway. If you've listened to me at all, you know that I love talking about all of this kind of thing, what we're going to talk about today. But I just kind of wanted to give a little backstory in that we got connected in just kind of an interesting way. I had been following some of the things that remind me the name. It's the School of Civic
and Economic Thought and
Economic
Leadership.
Thought at okay.
Yeah, you can call it either SCETL or even better, the Civic School.
The Civic School. Let's stick with that. That's nice and simple. So seeing some great things coming out of that Civic School at ASU, I was following a podcast of Civics in a Year that came through there and just some of the speakers and things that happened. And so then you and I got connected, and I'm really excited to have this conversation today.
So am I.
Yeah, so before we get into all of that, if you could just give us an introduction so that people know who you are, your background, wife, kids, where you're from, that kind of thing, whatever you want to share.
So I'm originally from Texas, moved to the East Coast. That's where my first teaching jobs were, at small classical liberal arts schools. Mm-hmm. And so I understand like that draw, that desire to send your student to somewhere where they're really digging into the great texts, they're looking at the big ideas, and it's all sort of rooted in this tradition that appreciates not only the American experiment, but also the traditions, specifically the Judeo-Christian tradition and the classical tradition that brought us to where we are. So events eventually brought me over to Arizona. Being from Texas, I like the American West, so happy to be here. I also have my wife teaches at the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership as well. We could just call it the Civic School. But a lot of ASU schools, they have these really long names. ASU loves long names. So the acronym is SCETL, but we'll just call it the Civic School. But
sounds good.
That's the brief story of kind of what I study and what brought me here.
And you have 6 children, right?
I do, yes.
Yeah.
5 daughters and a boy who, oh my goodness, he's got so many mothers who
I
love
can
to
only
mother him.
imagine.
Yeah.
With 5 girls and a boy. And what are their age ranges? So they're at home, right, for the most part?
15 to 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's crazy and fun at your house, right?
Very fun. Lots of pink, but now mixed in with trucks and dinosaurs and lots of Captain America stuff.
There you go. Yeah. Love it. And so I was just thinking too that you're from Texas and you spent a lot of time in New England area, yet you have no accent at all. Like how did that happen?
I don't know why. So originally from Oklahoma, and my sister,
because that accent's pretty thick.
My
there,
sister
Oklahoma.
and my mother, you can hear it a little more, but my father and I don't. I don't know wwhy. We just kind of picked up the generic Hollywood accent.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. That has nothing.
I could turn it on if I needed to. But I think I'll spare our listeners.
Yes, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. I just noticed that you said you were from Texas, and I have lots of family in Texas, and you sound nothing like them.
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay. So we both, I homeschooled all of my kids. Mine are adults now, and you guys are homeschooling yours as well. And I know that there's been a draw kind of to classical education in recent years, because it seems like we had gotten away from that in a lot of ways in public school, of looking at like original source documents, really emphasizing critical thinking and asking questions. And there seems to be kind of a resurgence in homeschooling, in things like classical conversations, in some of the great heart schools, where there's more of a draw, and parents are realizing and understanding how important that is for young people to have both of those, to have the classic education, the classical education with the classics, with original source documents. Why are those things so important in education?
I mean, education, when I think of education, some of the earliest forms of education, first of all, you see it in the Hebrew Bible, you see it in the Old Testament. And what do they talk about in the Old Testament? When you read the Pentateuch, there's these passages in Deuteronomy, a little bit in Exodus, but especially in Deuteronomy, where they talk about repeating the laws and repeating the rituals that bind people together, and having them bound like on your head, but more importantly on your heart. Okay, so education is about understanding the text, the ideas that bind us together as a people. If you look at another great Republican entity in history, you think of the Roman Republic. And the American founders, they were fascinated by the Hebraic Republic, so ancient Israel. They're fascinated by the Roman Republic. And there's a guy by the name of Cato, and he tells us how he educated his kid. He took him out swimming, taught him how to throw javelins, but he also taught him the history of the Roman Republic. He taught him laws. He taught him the traditions that made one a good Roman citizen. And this is the liberal arts tradition. And the modern liberal arts tradition goes back to the Renaissance era. And this is when thinkers like Petrarch were arguing, you want good citizens, then you need to educate them in the classical liberal arts. And it's the liberal arts, it means like the free arts in a certain way. But part of that meaning is that it frees people. And it helps them be free, but also frees their minds so that they can think correctly. The Americans picked up on those ideas. They're not ones who wanted to like throw all those kinds of great ideas out the window. No, they adopted the best ideas and they innovated in new ways. And that's what's so wonderful about the American project. And so that's what's important about like a civic tradition in the United States, is it picks up the great texts, not only the Federalist Papers, the U.S. Constitution, the Lincoln-Douglas debates, Washington's farewell address, presidential speeches. I could go on and on. These are the kinds of things that we study at the civic school. But it's not only that, it's also some of those older texts. So Plato, Aristotle, Cicero. Today, I'm going to erase from this podcast, and I'm going to go back, and we're going to talk about, we just talked about Cicero and Plato and Socrates, and now we're going to talk about, okay, how did Christianity alter understanding of justice and statesmanship, and what is the state? And we're going to actually, people are going to be reading the Beatitudes. They're going to be reading Acts and Romans. So this is what the civic school does, is it takes all these great texts from history, and then it looks at how do we apply them today, and how do we use that application to make better citizens and people who pursue the good life and care more and more about seeking the truth.
So you were saying this, where you're headed after that, that's part of one of the classes that you're teaching, right? Yeah. And looking at these, so Plato, looking at philosophers, and that, how does that, I just wanted you to expand a little bit on what you were saying about the idea of justice and how that is important in that, the whole concept of civics and understanding. And I think this is something that, when you're looking at the modern term of justice, it means something different than what we're talking about, of just that sort of eternal justice, of basic justice for humanity, right? And not in specific sort of political microcosms that you have where they're talking, that it's kind of a hot button word. But Plato and all of the philosophers, they talked about justice. The Bible talks about justice, all of those things. That was something that you had mentioned that I just wanted to have you expand a little bit on that thought.
Yeah, so one of the seminal texts that we have that almost every single teacher at the civic school teaches is Plato's Republic. And he introduces basically all the basic definitions that you would see about justice. Is justice merely what the strong want? They invent what justice is. Or is justice like the weak collecting together and saying, we're not going to be mean to each other? Or is justice, and this is what Plato, this is kind of the direction he's leading his reader in, is justice something about proper order? And what if you live in a disordered society? Well, you can still order your soul.
Yes.
So that, and how do you order your soul, though? You have to read good texts, you have to think deeply, you have to use your reason, and not only be like governed by your desires. Now that's really compatible, and this is why I think it's important for Christians to think about this. This is really important because the Bible itself is also a political text.
Yes.
And it has really important political points to make, and it's got very foundational political ideas. It doesn't apply to all sorts of particular issues in a way that a lot of people want, but it provides a foundation for similar concepts of justice. And the biblical account of justice is that we understand justice by the way God interacts with himself, okay? So within the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, they interact in a way that's perfect, it's harmonious, it's ordered. And then that's justice. And then we see how God interacts with humanity. Yeah. And he acts in a good way, in a moral way, in a merciful way. That also is justice. So justice in the biblical account is something that humans can aspire to, should aspire to in the Christian tradition, right? And that Christian tradition that we see in, for example, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and then that classical tradition that we see in Plato, that's picked up by the founders who took very seriously both the classics and the Christian traditions that they came out of in Europe, and particularly in Great Britain.
Yeah, and that is a really interesting thing to look at too. When you and there's so many documents, whether it's letters, official documents like the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and or whether it's Alexis de Tocqueville's view on what happened, with his tour in America and what he wrote about. There's so many different things that you could look at, but one of the themes throughout all of that is that, again, the classics, and looking at things like Plato, looking at Roman, you were talking about Roman government and that Roman society, and looking at those Judeo-Christian values and mixing those things together and talking about how to create that ordered society to where people can be free. They're not controlled by their vices, but they're free to live responsibly and have an ordered society. There is a common thread through all of that, but you have to look at all of those things and look at where they come from and what the references are. So I love that you guys are doing that at the Civic School. I think it's amazing. With that, in that same vein, another thing that, for me anyway, becomes very clear is that there's this idea that I'm trying to figure out how to word this. I have two different things going on in my head at the same time. Let's pick one and go with that. There are two things. One is that there was sort of a general understanding of most of these writers. I mean, again, these were very different people with very different belief backgrounds. Some of them we would consider to be Christians. Some of them were more different. I'm losing the words.
Like pagans, secular. There are all sorts
theists,
of, and it's important at the Civic School. You got to read all of these like seminal texts, all the really, really important texts. We don't avoid any of the texts,
right?
And we also don't try to come at them from a perspective of this is sort of a trend that happens to be, it's a fad at the moment, and everyone's sort of picking up on it, or it's been no. It's like, what does an author mean when he's writing?
Right.
And like, what do we take away from that? And if I explained that author to that author, if I had that opportunity, would he say, you've got me right? That's always the first step.
Yes.
And that because we believe in this thing called truth, right?
Right.
Like if you go to the University of Texas, Austin, up on their main academic building is "The truth shall set you free." So they're quoting the book of John.
Right.
And with this idea that there's something freeing in the truth. And again, that plays back to the liberal arts. And it plays back to what a civic school is supposed to do. It's supposed to be freeing people, but there has to be a commitment to the truth. And so I think a lot of parents look at higher education and they're concerned that people can define their own truth, or that, and I have students who talk about my truth, and I talk about, well, can you have my truth? Is that possible? Right? That's a contradiction in terms.
Yes.
There's truth, right? And whether you agree with the truth or not, that's different than whether or not it's your truth. You don't own the truth. The truth is just true.
Yes.
And so it's really important that parents know that there's a place that they can go to where students are they're going to pursue the good life that is based on the truth. And they're going to do this by wrestling with these great texts. And it's hard.
It is hard.
It's very, very difficult when Plato talks about justice. It's almost like, is it this beast that's on the ground and it's like really sneaky and it's like we're in the dark and we're like hunters and we can't get it? That's how hard it is. But it doesn't mean, just because it's hard to get to, it doesn't mean that it's not important to find the truth and to find justice.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that it's not really rewarding. But all the really, really, the things that are the most rewarding, having kids, being in the military, like initiating yourself into like a really rigorous program, being an athlete, the Olympics, they all involve really hard work. Yeah. And our job at the Civic School is to make students work hard, to read hard text, to make good arguments, to write good papers, and to wrestle with these big ideas so that when they leave, like they know how to think, they can read anything, and they know how to be a good leader. That's
amazing. I love that. And that it's really important. And I think I'm glad to see that, because I do feel like I'm an educator as well. I've been in education for a very long time. I used to teach in public school. I teach in homeschoolers now and homeschooled my own kids. But you kind of have, I have seen this trend of it seems like a dumbing down of that, just overall, not in specific arenas, but of not really thinking through and just sort of regurgitating sound bites and information. And I'm glad to see that there are pockets, at least, that are going back to those hard, because that really is what makes us a better society and what makes us better thinkers and better speakers, better governors, legislators, is to be able to reason and think through and understand all of those nuances of the history and the current and how all of that plays together. It's very encouraging to me to see that. And I've seen it in several different pockets. And this is one of them, which I was not aware was going on at ASU. And I'm really glad to see that. I graduated from ASU back with Moses and, the in the days of yore. But I'm glad to see that is happening there at ASU. That's encouraging to me.
Well, and something else I should just say that I think it's important for parents in Arizona to understand that as well. That I mean, the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership, the Civic School, was founded recently in 2017 by the legislature to cultivate good citizens, all the things we were talking about. But what's great if you're from Arizona, you don't have to send your student and pay $40,000 or $50,000 in tuition all the way across the country at some quaint liberal arts school. Those are great. I love them. I've taught at places like them, right? And there's a lot of value there. Maybe you can't afford that. Maybe your student doesn't want to go that far. Maybe that there are certain logistics that won't work based on your family. Well, there's a place you can do that here in Arizona that takes very seriously all the same things that a Grove City or a Hillsdale or the best institutions like the James Madison program at Princeton University. There's a place where they can do that right here in local, Arizona at ASU that is friendly to them and that takes seriously the American experiment and how valuable America has been to the world. It's not flawless, right? But it's like we take very seriously those texts and we respect those American traditions, and it's a safe place to go where we're going to be hard on your students because we're going to make them learn and we're going to make them wrestle through great text. But it's not a place where they're just going to get bogged down by passing fads that in 10 years aren't going to matter. And sometimes that happens in different places, and that's not what the Civic School is about.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. I think that's really good to know. I'd heard bits and pieces about it, and that was when I reached out and was trying to connect with that because it kept coming up. I kept seeing things that were, again, that Civics in a Year podcast, some of the speakers that were coming through and some of the things that were happening. And I thought, I really want to see what is happening there because everything that I had seen was good. It was meaningful and not seeming to be really politically skewed or like you were talking about with the fads that are happening politically, but looking at those things, it's important to look at different sides, to have those kind of conversations, but to do it in a way that's reasoned. And that does seem to be what's happening there. So one of the things that I, along with all of those, you were talking about the encouragement of religion as well as laws, right? That those things connect together because you have the truth and justice that Judeo-Christian values or whatever religion someone may be talk about. And then you also have legal laws that are, whether it's state law and the Constitution, those two things together. But when you're looking at all of those founding documents, it seems to me, again, we're talking about those themes that happen, that there was a kind of an understanding that people were basing their morality on something. So in looking at those original documents, there was an understanding. You have the John Adams quote about it, that the Constitution was made for a moral and religious people, and it was not, I'm paraphrasing, but that it was not equipped to govern people who were not. You have George Washington talking about his faith and things that were going on. There's so many references to whether it's from a Christian, Judeo-Christian basis, or whether it's just a general moral compass. There was sort of a general understanding at the time when all of these documents and writings were happening that people were largely operating out of a sense of there is a right and there is a wrong, there is a truth, there is sort of a moral good that we need to base society on, because otherwise we have chaos, right? I mean, it's I may be butchering the quote, but about how democracy, a true democracy, is two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner, right? So if you have that pure democracy, you have chaos, because it's always our human nature, our base desires is going to be where the powerful oppress the weak. And you have, because that's where we tend to go as people if we don't have sort of a moral code that we're operating by. And even though there's a lot of difference in the way that those things are portrayed and talked about in those documents, there really is an assumption of a moral code that people are operating by in order to function as a society.
Right.
Yeah. Do you have any specific examples of that or anything of that? That was a really long explanation of my thoughts, but.
So the faculty at the Civic School, we've got a wide range of faculty that bring a whole host of different areas of expertise. Got a world traveler who's taught China, who's proficient in Romanian and a number of other European languages. We have several veterans. We have people who advised different departments in the government. They are, we don't all agree on, they come from different religious traditions. They come from different experiences, and that's really healthy, I think, for the students that we teach. So when we take any text, we're not a monolith. We don't all have the same political views. We don't all have the same religious views, but all of the faculty at the Civic School take very seriously religion, and they also take very seriously how it's this medieval concept that philosophy and handmaiden, is used by different people, but the philosophy is the handmaiden of theology, or vice versa. And those two go hand in hand, because they're getting to the primary question of where do humans come from? Where does justice come from? Where does morality come from? And so our faculty, we all engage those big questions from the text, again, taking very seriously what the text themselves say. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah.
I can give you more specific examples, but.
Yeah, no, and I was just, I feel like, I think I'm not explaining myself super well, but what I'm trying to get at too is that there's this idea, kind of a modern idea, that and I'm not talking about necessarily biblical morality, I'm saying morality in general, but that those things are separate from, like, the Constitution is its own sort of thing, but that when you look at the writings, there was an understanding that people were not going to be murderers and despicable people, that there was a sense of, I'm going to control my base desires to for the good of society, right? In whatever that meant, whether that meant that someone was a Christian and they had, or whether it was just a moral code that people had. But there was a general understanding in the way that you look at the writings, like I said, that the Constitution was for a moral and religious people. That's just one example of it. But talking about how that sense of that there is a general societal, across cultural boundaries, different countries, we all basically have some very similar moral foundations, right? That murder is not okay, that theft or abuse is not okay. Those are sort of general principles that it's difficult to separate them from all of those writings, because it's generally understood that was how people were operating. Right.
If you try to, there's the good analogy, I think it was the Os Guinness that had made this analogy, is like America stands in the potential position of being a tree that has been cut off from its roots. So the roots of the American tradition are the things that we've talked about. It's like the idea that you want to have an ordered soul, right? That's very classical tradition, but what's Proverbs talking about? Proverbs is talking about the wise man, and like who's ordered and lives by a certain set of rules, even if he's poor, but he's still he's still happier if he lives a certain way. So those kinds of ideas from both the Jewish, the classical, and the Christian traditions, they talk about there is truth, there's objective morality, that are universal standards of right and wrong.
Right.
And most people behave this way.
Right.
There may be some people who argue that they
they're-
don't agree with that,
Yes.
but they get really upset if they get cheated in the grocery
Right.
store line out
Yes.
of 10 cents or
Yes.
whatever it may be, right?
Yes.
There's all of a sudden there's a universal standard of math that tells me that I can't be cheated out of my money.
Right.
So yeah, if America is founded on this idea that there's objective truth, power is not all that defines us, power is not merely the monopoly on violence, there's actually a sacred notion that there are ordained authorities and that there are people who are legitimate and illegitimate authorities. And this is the argument that's made in the Declaration of
Right.
Independence, which references God 4 times,
Yeah.
right? It's saying that there's a God, he's watching, and we have to behave in accordance with him. That's not John Calvin arguing that. That's not John Edwards arguing that. That's like the entire body through the voice, through the pen of Thomas Jefferson arguing that of the people who signed the Declaration of Independence. So if you have those roots, and then you try to maintain a tree with flourishing with leaves and fruit that doesn't have those roots that are touching into objective morality and the concept that there is objective truth and the concept that there is that we come from traditions that have something to offer us. You sever it from that, the tree's going to wither and die.
Right.
So the American experiment needs an idea that is tethered to the idea that there are objective standards of morality. And the purpose for public universities in the United States, and this is why the legislatures are founding these civic schools, is to help cultivate
Yes.
citizens.
Yeah.
This is what the taxpayers are paying for,
Right.
right?
That
Like,
should
these are
be,
public
yes.
universities,
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
So, like, our job as educators, we shouldn't whitewash anything, but our job
Right.
as educators should be to take very seriously the American experiment. And our American experiment has these 2 foundational documents that are very rooted in the Judeo-Christian
Mm-hmm.
tradition, right? And we have to take that seriously. We cannot sever ourselves from that. And we should cultivate citizens who want to have ordered souls,
Yes.
and who also want to respect the traditions that allow them to be at one of the best places in the world. The best universities in the world, they're all in the United States.
Right.
Why is that? It's because the American experiment's doing great things.
Right.
Right. Why are the top research universities in the United States? It's because of the freedoms that were guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution and the traditions that undergirded them.
Right.
So we're there to help refine that tradition and to help students respect it, but not to undermine it.
Right.
That's not what
Yeah.
the civic school does.
Yeah, no, I wasn't implying that, but and I think that was a perfect explanation of that, and that because it's very unique. It's a very unique thing in the world to have that. So many, when you look at monarchies, in other words, it's all the leader is going to tell the people. This is it's much more based on the people of America. You keep referring to the American experiment. It is a very unique and beautiful thing that should be protected. But in order for us to protect it, that's where the title goes to preserving liberty. In order for us to protect it, we have to understand how it happened and what it was based on and all of the thought that went into it and the people that were involved and where that came from and what it was based on, and to be able to understand and carry that forward. Or we end up with the 2 wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. Right?
So, and here's another great example of something that the Civic School is doing. It's coming up later this weekend. So, as we all know, it's the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Also of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, for the economists out there. They're feeling like kind of overshadowed right now. But it's the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So what's the Civic School do? We're hosting a conference about the American Revolution and its global impact. Not only on the global influences that impacted the American Revolution, but also how the American Revolution impacted the world at that time. And then, of course, its lingering legacy into today. You're not going to find as many places in the United States, as many centers and universities doing that as should be doing it. Right. And the scholars that we're bringing in are they're all, as I keep saying, they take very seriously the importance and the value of the Declaration of Independence, how unique it was, how if you don't safeguard and protect it and maintain that living memory, then you will lose the liberties that it has that it has preserved. So what's great is not only are we doing this conference, it's for students, it's for faculty, it's for the public. So I would encourage anyone who's listening to this podcast, hey, come to that. It's at ASU. See what we're about. Learn about how we're doing education at ASU and the Civic School, and like how seriously we take the documents, the ideas, and the people that made America such a great place.
Yeah, and you were saying, because not only that, so the conference is open, but there are also speaking events. People come to talk that are open to the public as well.
They're like, so they've got, and they're not on like crazy topics that are like that have value, right?
Yeah.
There are some academics that do like really, really, really narrow topics, and like so some of them are crazy, but some of them are just like good, but they don't have as much like staying power for the average person. But that's not the case with the Civic School, because it's like its purpose. It's supposed to help average citizens be better citizens, and it's supposed to cultivate young people to be good citizens. So another one of the lectures that we're doing, or that is coming, that's upcoming, is on tariffs. Right?
Okay.
It's like,
Right.
is this good for economics? Is
Right.
it bad for economics? And so it's asking those questions. Again, it's free and open to the public. Another one of
Because
my
that's a big topic right now.
It is,
and
right?
people don't know, and they don't know the history or
And
where.
so we've got
that's
academics coming in. It's being moderated. There are going to be questions, and so
Love it,
it's a place where people can engage these really important issues.
And it's good to hear, differing opinions and have
Absolutely.
that conversation. That's what makes us more intelligent,
Yeah.
more reasoned people, is to be able to listen to different sides of an opinion and where that stands. And
Right.
you frame your own beliefs and how you stand on it by listening and asking those kind of questions.
Right.
Yeah. So what was another one you were?
Well, and
gonna...
I've got a colleague, for example, who has they're teaching a class on I think the class is called Modern Political Statecraft, but it's basically grand strategy and international diplomacy for the modern age. And they have several older Phoenix residents who are auditing the class because they want to be plugged in, they want to be engaged, and they're so involved, they're so enmeshed in the conversation. So I think yesterday the topic, there was a debate between which is more important, land power or sea power. This is an incredibly important question,
Right.
because we're comparing the American naval power at its current stage versus Chinese naval power, right? And are we on par with them? Are they superior? Does that have implications? How will that bear on our relationship with Taiwan? These are very, very important questions that American citizens need to be conversant in, not just knowledgeable, but they need to know how to talk about these matters, and then how to vote for people.
Right.
So, again, that's something that like you can get at the Civic School. So that's an example of someone doing that. It was a Phoenician citizen who's, I can say that right, Phoenician. That's like, is that the way to say someone from Phoenix?
Phoenician, yes.
Yeah, okay.
If you're from Phoenix, you're Phoenician.
Okay, there
yes.
you go. I'm always thinking of the Carthaginians and the Punic Wars, but yes, the Phoenician. If you're
I am a Phoenician, yes.
If you're a Phoenician who wants to like audit a class, you can do that.
And so what does that mean? Just explain what that means.
It means
to
that
audit a class.
you're attending a class even though you're not a student, and you can get like, there are different ways to do it at ASU, but you're basically attending a class, and
So you don't get credit for it.
you don't get credit. There are ways you could do it where you can also get
Right.
credit, right? And there are different like price ranges for how you do it. But some people are thinking,
I'm just interested
They've
in
reached
the
a certain
topic,
age
yeah.
where they're like, I don't need a degree, but I want to take some classes, and so for a very reasonable cost, I can audit a class, and I can engage in these kinds of questions, and I can be at the top of my game in terms of certain diplomatic questions, or maybe they want to take a class on Tocqueville, right? You mentioned Tocqueville earlier. Maybe they want to take a class on John Locke. Like, the Civic School offers those kinds of classes, right? So that's another way. So these public events, conferences, and lectures. There's also, you can audit a class. There, you can send your students there and to this place that is a stable place that is going to be hard, but it's not going to undermine everything that it means
Right.
to be American.
Yeah.
So those are just some of the most obvious ways that people can get plugged in with the Civic School.
Yeah, I love it. So just we're getting close to wrapping up, but what is an author from that time? So do you teach, what kinds of classes do you teach? What you teach a specific sort of area of study, right?
Right.
Within, what do you teach?
So my research interest is in Republican statesmanship and command. That's kind of a fancy way of saying what makes historical republics and how did they defend themselves. So I'm very interested. I'm a citizen soldier myself. I'm very interested in how do citizen armies beat professional armies or mercenary armies. And citizen armies usually go hand in hand with republics. So that's kind of what I research. What I teach at ASU, like dovetails pretty well with my research. And there's one class that I teach. It's a big class that is offered. It's a lot of non-civic school students, so it's great that I get business majors and engineering majors and et cetera. But it's called The Great Ideas of Politics and Ethics. And there are different ways to teach it. Some people pick like 5 or 6 major texts, like maybe Homer or the Gospels and like Augustine or Plato, and then Locke or Mill. There's different ways to do the class. The way I do it, because I'm more of a historian, is I start with the Steele of Hammurabi, and then I take them all the way up to the modern era. We actually start our first class. We look at, if you go to the U.S. House of Representatives. I don't know if you've been there, but if you go up there and did you notice the little circles that are up in the right above all the doors?
Yes.
Okay, they're a bunch of busts. And all those busts are famous lawgivers throughout history.
Okay.
It's a really cool idea that when they remodeled the U.S. House in the 1950s, they thought, they got a committee together, and they said, let's come up with all the different people, all the different lawgivers throughout history. And it goes all the way back to Hammurabi that played into the American project. And it's got a great Daniel Webster quote about how like we have to live up to these standards of all these lawgivers. So I thought, man, what better way to teach the great ideas of politics and ethics than using that as my springboard. And so I start with Hammurabi, and then I go throughout history. We look at Plato, we look at Cicero, as I talked about. We look at the Old Testament. So we spend a great deal of time on Genesis and passages out of Exodus, Deuteronomy, and Kings. And then right now like I said, as soon as I rush out of here, I'm going to go and I'm going to be teaching in 2 hours. I'm going to be teaching about the Beatitudes and the trials of Jesus, and we're going to be reading sections of Romans and Peter. And then we get into the medieval period. We read biographies of great kings, some of whom were Christian and measured up to that. Some of whom said they were Christian and didn't measure up to that. And then we move on to the modern project and the Enlightenment. And we actually close with the 20th century dictators and the influence of Marx and Nietzsche on 20th century dictators, and how
that is a huge.
It is, right? But what you walk away with
is an enormous period of time.
But what you walk away with are, wow, there are lots of different ways to examine justice, the good life.
Yeah.
What is the way to order a regime? Should it be a pure democracy? Should we have elements of monarchy, democracy, and aristocracy? What if I'm just a person who's not going to be spectacular? How can I still be a great leader in my family? Those are questions that we ask, right?
Yeah.
And we look at all throughout history, and we ask people, we read these sources, and my goal is you read these ancient texts and you ask them the biggest questions about life.
Yeah.
Like, what does it mean to be good? What is the truth?
Yeah.
How can I be a just person? How can I be a good leader? And that applies to, how do I interact with my roommate when I really don't like them?
Right.
Or what do I do with this family drama that is just crushing me right now?
Right.
Or what am I supposed to think about this, this president or this legislator or this, this problem in American
world
politics?
event, yeah.
And so, and I don't tell them what to think,
right?
But I do guide them through the text and talk about, okay, how, what I had them engage with these ideas and debate these fundamental concepts. My goal is that when they walk out of there, not only do they appreciate all the things that brought us to the American experiment, they're also wrestling through, how do I live a good life? What does it mean to have an ordered soul? What does it mean to be content and at peace? Right?
Yeah. And
those are the kinds of things that this is one thing that I do in my little way in that one class at ASU. Right. But we've got, 25, 30 other faculty at the Civic School who are approaching these same questions with very similar texts, oftentimes the same text, and they have the same degree of intensity about what matters, and we're coming at it with the goal of cultivating good citizens and helping people have the good life.
Yeah, I love that. So final question, if you have, because I do know a lot of people who have never picked up a book like Plato's Republic or any of these things that we've been talking about. If you've been to college, if you've had a college degree, you're more comfortable reading those kinds of books, or if you were homeschooled, homeschoolers tend to read those kind of books as well. But what would you say is a good place to start? What would something be that is a little bit more manageable maybe for someone who has no experience reading those kinds of texts to kind of get a start in reading some of those older texts, whether they're from early America or whether they're philosophy or biographies on people? Do you have anything that jumps out at you that you would maybe recommend? I'm throwing this question at you. Blind,
this is a really hard question because I want to go in a ton of different directions. I tend to say it kind of depends on what they're going for. If you want to pick up a great classical text that engages these things in a fun, entertaining way, I don't think you can get any better than Plutarch. So Plutarch, he wrote lives. Okay, he also wrote some philosophical works, but he wrote lives of really famous people like Alexander the Great, Caesar, Quintus Fabius Maximus is my favorite Roman statesman.
Do you have a child
Camillus,
named Princess?
I would. I had girls, right? So I had 5 girls. Right. I had planned on like 3 Roman names, right? And that's not what happened.
There you go.
But that's okay because I have girls who are named medieval queens, and my girls are the best, right? And they're very sweet to their papa. So I have no objections to that. But that was not the original. That was not the original plan. But I think Plutarch
is a good,
I think that would be a really great start to. It's one of the best classical texts. I would also encourage people. So you have a lot of Christian listeners, of course, on this podcast. Read back through the passages in Samuel and Kings.
Yes.
Read like 1 Peter and Romans.
Yes.
So we're doing 1 Peter 2 today, and then Romans 13 in class. But read those entire books and really wrestle with the questions of what does it mean to not be a citizen of this world? But then why does Paul still say, I'm a Roman citizen, not once but twice, right, when he's imprisoned. So that reread those texts, okay, and then sort of engage. I could point to all sorts of other really good books, but so kind of go back to Scripture if you're looking and think about the political ideas, and more importantly, read Genesis. Read the whole thing, start to finish. Genesis 1 through 11, and don't get in your mind that Genesis 1 through 11 is just about like specific historical details. Get in your mind the sense, and there's that to it. I'm not saying that's not there, but get into your mind the understanding that Genesis is making an argument about how the cosmos came into being, and like how God is the God of all that exists. But what's great about all of Genesis is God is the God of not only Jacob, but also of Esau. God is the God not only of Isaac, but also Ishmael and Hagar. In fact, one of the first prayers we have in the Bible is from Hagar, an Egyptian, right? That has incredible political overtones because like it's talking about how monotheism has this idea that God cares about every single human being.
Right.
So read back through Genesis and look at how the ideas of being made in the image of God, of God being the creator of all that exists, and God repeatedly saying the creation that he made is good. Those are powerful ideas that have really deep political implications. Look at Plutarch, reread those passages of Scripture. Email me if you have questions because I've done a horrible job answering that question.
No,
because I just feel like I could go on forever. Yeah. But email me and I would love to give you, hey, this is a great primer on these texts.
That was just sort of a thought I had at the end here.
But I could definitely provide more information.
Because I know that those books are overwhelming. It's overwhelming to people if you have never read. I was even thinking like the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists because those are short little. They're a little bit shorter. Some of the
sure. If we're going to look at if we're going to look at American text, sit down and read the Constitution. You would be surprised how many people have not read. Yes. Sit down and read the Constitution. One of my favorite texts: read Washington's farewell address.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
This is another.
That's an amazing text.
Here's what's great about it: is he actually is arguing for both classical and Christian and sort of modern economic virtues.
Yes.
That's the American experiment. It's all there in the farewell address. Classical, Christian, but also modern industry. It's all in there. So read his farewell address.
That's a really good
read the
one
Lincoln
to
Douglas
recommend.
debates. So I mean, there are these classic texts. Yeah. And what I would love is if we have a way, I'll give you a couple of basic primers, and we'll say for these sources go here. Yeah.
Sure. If you emailed me those, I could add them in the show notes. We can link it, and we'll link the SCETL Civic School.
And I can make up for my woeful deficiency in answering that question.
It was perfect. It was off that I didn't prepare you for that question. I just was thinking about it because I was thinking about we're talking about all of these texts that are really difficult for people to read if you have no experience. Yeah. Just to encourage people to get started somewhere and just read something and then start with something else. But once you get rolling, it gets a little addictive.
Yeah.
At least for me, it does.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate
it's
it. This
been
was a
great.
great conversation. I appreciate you coming out here and doing this, and we'll link all that information so that people can check out what's happening at that civic school, attend some events, look into programs for their students, and thank you for being here.
Sounds great. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on Into the Fire, powered by Dream City Church.
You can listen to this podcast on Apple and Spotify and follow us on social media to find all the info on the show notes. To learn more about Dream City Church, visit our website at dreamcitychurch.us. Thanks for listening.